The server room on the 14th floor of Meridian Technologies was the kind of place that cost $2 million to build and could cost 50 times that to lose. 48 custom-built rack servers lined the walls in 2 precise rows, each one humming at a carefully maintained 55 degrees Fahrenheit, cooled by a redundant HVAC system that had its own backup generator and its own backup for the backup. The room had been designed by the best infrastructure engineers Meridian's money could hire, certified by 3 independent auditors, and declared, in the words of the firm's head of IT, Marcus Reyes, essentially failure-proof. At 11:47 on a Tuesday night, it failed. The alarm reached Claire Ashford's phone at 11:49, 2 minutes after the primary cooling unit tripped and the room's temperature began climbing toward the threshold that would trigger an automatic server shutdown. Claire was 41 years old, the founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies, a data analytics firm valued at $600 million, whose entire operational infrastructure ran through those 48 servers. She was sitting at the kitchen island of her penthouse apartment in Midtown, still in her work clothes, reviewing a pitch deck for a Series D round she was closing in 11 days. She looked at the alert, understood immediately what it meant, and called Marcus Reyes before she had finished reading the second line. Marcus answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "The primary cooling unit on 14 is down," Claire said. "How long before the backup kicks in?" A pause, the sound of sheets moving, a lamp clicking on. "The backup should have already kicked in," Marcus said. Let me pull up the monitoring dashboard." A longer pause. "Claire, the backup unit is showing an error state. It's not responding." "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said slowly, in the voice of a man who was still waking up and deeply wished he wasn't, "that both units are down simultaneously. We have somewhere between 22 and 28 minutes before the room hits the shutdown threshold. If the servers go offline mid-cycle, we lose every active data process currently running. That's 11 client pipelines, including the Hargrove Group's real-time analytics feed." Claire was already moving toward her coat. "The Hargrove Group's contract has a $100,000 per hour penalty clause for unscheduled downtime." "I know," Marcus said. "Get every engineer you have to that building right now," she said. "It's midnight, Claire." "Marcus, I'm calling them." She was in a cab within 4 minutes, phone pressed to her ear, cycling through her head of facilities, her backup IT contractor, and the building's emergency maintenance line. By the time her cab pulled up to Meridian's Park Avenue South office building at 12:08 a.m., 3 engineers were already in the lobby, laptops under their arms, looking simultaneously exhausted and frightened. The building's overnight security guard, a heavy-set man named Dale, met them at the elevator bank. "Cooling alarm is still active on 14, he said. "Temperatures at 71 degrees and climbing." 68 was the threshold. They rode the elevator in silence. Claire watched the floor numbers climb and thought about the Hargrove contract and the Series D pitch and the 11 client pipelines and the $600 million valuation that rested, at this precise moment, on 48 servers in a room that was slowly getting warmer. The server room was glass-walled, visible from the open-plan engineering floor that surrounded it. Through the glass, the rack lights blinked in their usual patterns, indifferent to the crisis unfolding around them, as if they had not yet received the news that they were approximately 15 minutes from an involuntary shutdown. Marcus Reyes arrived 4 minutes after Claire, slightly out of breath, his collar open. He went directly to the primary cooling unit's external control panel, ran a diagnostic, and turned to his 3 engineers with an expression that Claire had learned to dread over 4 years of working with him. It was the expression of a man who understood a problem completely and had no immediate solution for it. "Primary unit has a catastrophic compressor failure," Marcus said, pulling up a schematic on his laptop. "It's not a reset situation. The compressor is physically seized. Backup unit's control board is throwing a communication error. It's seeing the primary unit as still active and refusing to override. It's a software conflict. I need to access the backup unit's firmware directly and force a manual command to break the override loop." "How long?" Claire asked. Marcus looked at his engineers. They looked at each other. 45 minutes, minimum. The firmware interface on these units is proprietary. We need the manufacturer's diagnostic cable, and I left mine at Marcus. 45 minutes, he said again, helplessly. The room temperature indicator on the wall panel read 73 degrees. It had been 71 6 minutes ago. Claire looked at the number and did the arithmetic and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. It was at that moment that the server room door opened, and a man in a gray Meridian maintenance uniform came in carrying a mop bucket. He stopped when he saw the cluster of people in front of the cooling units, looked at the temperature display on the wall, and set the mop bucket down. He was tall, somewhere around 38, with the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than a gym membership. His dark hair needed cutting. His uniform had his name stitched above the left breast pocket in white thread. Danny. He was holding a small black toolkit in his left hand, the personal kind that maintenance workers carry separately from the department equipment, the kind that accumulates specific tools for specific recurring problems over years of doing the same job in the same building. "Cooling units?" he said. Marcus looked at him the way senior engineers look at maintenance workers who wander into technical crises. Briefly, dismissively, and without altering his expression. "We have it covered. You can come back in the morning." Danny looked at the temperature display again. 73.4. "What's the backup unit doing?" "I said we have it covered." "The backup unit is stuck in a passive override loop," Claire said. Because she was the CEO, and she was 11 minutes from a $100,000 an hour penalty, and she would take information from anyone who appeared to have it. "It thinks the primary is still running." Danny nodded slowly. He walked past Marcus without asking permission and crouched in front of the backup cooling unit's lower access panel. He opened his toolkit, selected a flathead screwdriver and a small gray device the size of a television remote, and removed the panel. "What is that?" one of the engineers said, watching the gray device. "HVAC Universal Interface Tool," Danny said. He was already connecting a cable from the device to a port inside the panel. "Breaks proprietary firmware handshakes. Works on about 90% of commercial cooling units." He pressed 2 buttons on the device in sequence. A small green light blinked on. He looked at the unit's internal display, read something, pressed a 3rd button. A low mechanical hum built inside the backup unit, a sound that went from tentative to steady over about 4 seconds. The temperature display on the wall stopped climbing. It read 74.1, then 74.0, then 73.8. The backup cooling unit was running. The whole thing had taken 90 seconds. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Marcus Receivers was staring at the temperature display with the particular expression of a man who had just watched someone do, in 90 seconds, what he had estimated would take 45 minutes. One of the engineers made a sound that was almost a laugh, and then converted it hurriedly into a cough. Danny closed the access panel, disconnected his tool, and stood up. He picked up his toolkit. "Primary compressors seized," he said to Claire, as if she were the relevant person in the room, which she was. "You'll need a replacement unit. I'd call Archon HVAC in the morning. They stock the compressor for this model. Lead time is usually 2 days." "Thank you," Claire said. Danny nodded. He picked up his mop bucket. He left. The server room temperature continued to drop. The rack lights blinked on, serenely, as if nothing had happened. Marcus Reeves stood in front of the unit Danny had fixed and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "What just happened?" one of the engineers said finally. "The janitor fixed it," the other engineer said. Claire was already walking toward the door. She found Danny in the hallway outside, emptying a waste bin near the elevator bank. She had met thousands of people in her career, founders and investors and board members and engineers who had built things she could not have built herself. She was not someone who was easily surprised by competence. Danny had surprised her. "Where did you learn to use that tool?" she asked. He looked up. Up close, he had steady gray eyes and the particular calm of someone who was not easily rattled by anything, including CEOs approaching them in server room hallways at 12:30 in the morning. "I used to work in data center infrastructure maintenance," he said. "Before." "Before what?" A pause. The elevator hummed somewhere above them. "My daughter was born early," he said. 26 weeks. She was in the NICU for 4 months. My wife couldn't work during that time. I took what I could get when she came home, so I could be here in the evenings." He said it plainly, without seeking sympathy, the way people state facts they have long since made their peace with. "The building pays well, and the night shift lets me get her off the bus in the afternoons." Claire looked at him for a moment. "What did you do in data center infrastructure?" "Design, mostly," Danny said. "I built out server environments for financial firms, hedge funds, a few healthcare networks. Cooling architecture, redundancy systems, failover protocols." He picked up the waste bin. "The tool I use tonight I built myself, actually. The commercial version has a gap in its compatibility range for units with split firmware handshakes. Took me about a month to close the gap." Claire stared at him. "You built the tool?" "The commercial one doesn't work on about 10% of units," Danny said. "I kept running into that 10%. "What's your daughter's name?" Claire said. He looked at her with the mild, measuring expression of a man who was not entirely certain where this conversation was going, but was not alarmed by it. "Maya," he said. "She's 6. She's doing fine now." "Good," Claire said. And then, because she was a CEO and not a person who spent a great deal of time on preamble, "I want to talk to you. Not tonight. Come and find me tomorrow, whenever your shift starts. Ask at the front desk for Claire Ashford." Danny looked at her. Something shifted behind the gray eyes, a brief, private recalculation. "You're the CEO," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "Okay," Danny said. He picked up the mop bucket. "I'll find you tomorrow." He found her at 8:15 a.m., standing outside her office door in his maintenance uniform, the same toolkit under his arm. Claire's assistant, a young woman named Priya, had clearly not been expecting him and had clearly not known what to do with him, and had resolved the question by texting Claire, who had come out to meet him herself. She brought him into the corner office and closed the door. The Manhattan skyline occupied the full east-facing wall in a sweep of glass that, on a clear morning like this one, looked like a photograph of itself. Danny sat down across her desk and looked at the view with the expression of a man who was not particularly impressed by views. Claire sat down, folded her hands, and said, "Tell me about the data center work." He told her. It took 40 minutes. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he had spent 12 years building and maintaining server infrastructure for financial and healthcare clients across the Northeast, first as a junior systems engineer at a firm called Corix Solutions, then as a lead architect at a boutique consultancy called Delta Stack that had specialized in high-security data environments for hedge funds and private equity firms. He had designed 4 of the largest private data centers in the tri-state area, had held 6 infrastructure certifications, and had spent 2 years developing proprietary redundancy architecture that Delta Stack had licensed to 3 of the 5 largest investment banks in New York. Delta Stack had been acquired 18 months ago by a larger firm. The acquiring company had absorbed the IP, retained 2 of Delta Stack's 5 principals, and let the remaining staff go. Daniel had been let go 4 weeks after Maya was diagnosed with a secondary respiratory complication from her premature birth, at a point when his wife Rosa was working reduced hours to manage Maya's therapy schedule, and when the family's savings had already been largely consumed by 4 months of neonatal intensive care bills that their insurance had covered partially and incompletely. He had applied for 41 positions in data center engineering and architecture over the following 6 months. He had received 12 interviews and no offers, because every interview had eventually arrived at the same question in one form or another, a question about availability, about travel requirements, about whether he could commit to the on-call schedules that senior infrastructure roles required. And he had answered honestly every time, which was that he could not, because he had a 6-year-old daughter with ongoing medical appointments and a wife managing a modified work schedule, and he needed to be home by 4 p.m. most days. The 41st application, which was the last one he had sent, had been for the overnight maintenance position at Meridian Technologies. He had taken it because the night shift ended at 7 a.m., which gave him time to sleep before Maya's bus arrived at 3:45, and because the building's HVAC systems were complex enough to be interesting. Claire listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The tool you built," she said, "the one you used last night, is it documented anywhere? Schematics, software, anything?" "I have full documentation," Danny said. "I built it so I could replicate it if I needed to. The software is about 800 lines. What would it take to productize it, turn it into something that could be sold commercially to HVAC maintenance companies and data center operators?" Danny looked at her carefully. He had the same measuring quality she had noticed in the hallway the night before, a way of absorbing what he was being offered before deciding what to do with it. "The compatibility range would need to be expanded," he said. "There are probably 200 models of commercial cooling unit in active use in data centers right now. I've tested mine on 41 of them. To get to full commercial coverage, I'd need about 6 months and access to test units." "And the firmware communication gap that makes the tool necessary in the first place," Claire said. "Is it specific to HVAC units, or is it a broader problem?" Danny paused. "It's a broader problem," he said. "The same communication handshake gap exists in about 30% of commercial backup power systems, and a smaller percentage of industrial fire suppression systems." He looked at his hands for a moment. "If a fire suppression system has the same gap the backup cooling unit had last night, and both primary and secondary units are involved, the suppression system could fail to override correctly in a real fire scenario." The room was very quiet. "You know this because you found it," Claire said. "I know this because I found it," he confirmed, "in a data center in White Plains, 14 months ago. I reported it to the facility manager. He thanked me, and I never heard anything more about it." Claire looked at the Manhattan skyline for a moment. She thought about what was sitting on the other side of the glass wall behind her, 48 servers on the 14th floor, in a room that had come 11 minutes from an unscheduled shutdown because 2 cooling units had a software conflict that a maintenance worker with a tool he had built himself had resolved in 90 seconds. She thought about the White Plains data center and the fire suppression system, and the facility manager who had said thank you and moved on. She thought about the kind of problem that sits in a system for years because the person who found it did not have the title required to make anyone listen. "I want you to bring me the full documentation on the tool," she said. "Schematics, software, test results, everything you have. I want our engineering team to review it this week." She paused. "And I want you to take a new role here. Head of Infrastructure Resilience. Full salary, standard hours, flexibility built into the contract for school pickups and medical appointments." Danny did not say anything for a moment. He looked at his toolkit on the desk between them. Then he looked up. "That's a significant offer for someone you met in a hallway at midnight. It's a significant offer for someone who just saved $600 million worth of client data with a tool he built in his own time because a problem bothered him enough to fix it," Claire said. "I've spent 4 years building this company. I know what competence looks like, Mr. Reyes, and I know what it costs when you overlook it because it came through the wrong door." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then, "Maya has speech therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:30. "Block it in the calendar," Claire said. "It's non-negotiable. I'll tell HR." Danny nodded. He picked up the toolkit. He looked at the skyline for a moment, the view he had not been particularly impressed by earlier, and something in his expression shifted, private and brief. The way a man's face shifts when something he had stopped expecting comes back. "I'll have the documentation to you by Friday," he said. The productization of Danny's tool took 7 months. Claire funded it through a dedicated internal team of 4 engineers, with Danny leading the design and compatibility expansion. By the time the product reached commercial testing, it covered 187 cooling unit models and had been extended, as Danny had suggested it could be, to cover backup power and fire suppression systems as well. The resulting product, which the team called the Grid Bridge Diagnostic Interface, was demonstrated at a data center infrastructure conference in Chicago to an audience of 400 engineers, facility managers, and enterprise IT directors, and it generated pre-orders from 63 companies before the demonstration ended. Marcus Reeves, who attended the conference at Claire's request and sat in the second row for the demonstration, was quiet for a long time afterward. Then he turned to Claire and said, "He built this in the evenings." "He built the prototype in the evenings," Claire said. "The commercial version took 7 months with a full team." Marcus looked at the demonstration screen for another moment. "I told him to come back in the morning," he said. "I know," Claire said. "That was a mistake." "Yes," Claire said. "It was." 6 months after the Grid Bridge launch, a fire suppression system in a data center in Houston failed to override correctly during a cooling unit fault. The scenario was almost identical to the one Danny had flagged in White Plains 14 months earlier. The facility did not have Grid Bridge installed. The suppression system failed to activate for 9 minutes. The damage was significant. The facility installed Grid Bridge the following week. So did 42 other data centers in the following month. Maya Reyes turned 7 in the spring, in a small apartment in Queens that was somewhat easier to afford than it had been the year before. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn persistence, and she was, according to her first-grade teacher, the most technically minded 7-year-old the teacher had encountered in 20 years of teaching, a fact that did not surprise anyone who had met her father. On her birthday, she asked for a toolkit, a real one, not a toy. Her father took her to the hardware store on a Saturday morning and let her choose every piece herself. And she chose with the careful, unhurried precision of someone who intended to use what she selected. He labeled each tool with her name in black marker, and she carried the toolkit home in both arms with the seriousness of someone transporting something irreplaceable. He taught her how to use each one that afternoon at the kitchen table, while Rosa watched from the doorway with the expression of a woman watching 2 people who were made from the same material discovered at the same time. Some problems, Danny had told his engineering team once during the Grid Bridge development, are invisible until someone decides to look at them. The looking is the hardest part. Most people see a problem and wait for someone with the right title to fix it. The useful ones just fix it. He had said it plainly, without emphasis, in the same tone he used for everything, and the engineers had written it down. If this story of a quiet father, a midnight crisis, and the power of looking where others don't moved you, please hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who knows that the most important person in the room is not always the one at the head of the table. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, dramatic stories every single week. And tell us in the comments, what was the moment that got you? Was it the 90 seconds, or the tool he built himself, or Maya choosing her toolkit at the hardware store? The first month after Danny joined Meridian Technologies as head of infrastructure resilience was an education for almost everyone in the building, though the lessons arrived quietly, without announcement, in the way that things taught by people who do not particularly enjoy teaching tend to arrive. He moved through the office with the same unhurried efficiency he had brought to the maintenance floors, but the toolkit under his arm was now joined by a laptop, and the gray maintenance uniform had been replaced by dark jeans and a simple navy sweater that made him look, as Priya at the front desk observed to a colleague, like someone who had always been there and had simply been wearing a different uniform before. Marcus Reeves, to his credit, did not make it awkward. He appeared in Danny's new office on the first morning, a coffee in each hand, and set one on the desk without being asked. "I want to understand the grid bridge architecture," Marcus said. "From the beginning. I should have asked you that in the server room." "You should have," Danny agreed, without heat. He opened his laptop. "Pull up a chair." They spent 4 hours together that first morning, Marcus asking questions and Danny answering them with the careful precision of someone who had long since learned that the gap between knowing something and being able to explain it clearly was the gap where most technical problems lived. By noon, Marcus had 3 pages of notes and the expression of a man who had just had a significant portion of his professional understanding quietly reorganized. "Why didn't you flag the fire suppression vulnerability publicly after you found it in White Plains?" Marcus asked toward the end of the 4 hours. It was the question he had clearly been working toward. Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window. "I was a maintenance worker," he said. "I reported it to the facility manager. He logged it as a general maintenance observation. I wasn't in a position to take it further than that." He paused. "I thought about it. I looked into who I would need to contact to escalate it. The answer was a chain of people who would each need to be convinced that a maintenance worker's informal observation warranted their attention, and I had a 6-year-old with a respiratory therapy schedule, and I couldn't afford to spend 6 months convincing a chain of people to listen to me." Marcus looked at his notes. If GridBridge had existed 2 years ago, the White Plains facility would have flagged the gap automatically. "Yes," Danny said. "So you built the thing that would have made them listen," Marcus said. "I built the thing that made the problem visible," Danny said. Listening was still their choice. That distinction, between making a problem visible and making people respond to it, became the central argument of a paper Danny published 8 months later in a data center engineering journal, a paper that circulated widely enough that 3 regulatory bodies cited it in updated guidance documents for critical infrastructure maintenance. The paper's core argument was simple. The most dangerous failure points in complex systems are almost always found first by the people closest to the physical infrastructure: the maintenance workers, the overnight operators, the facility staff who live with the systems daily and notice when something is running differently from how it should. Those people almost never have the organizational standing to escalate what they find. Building systems that capture and surface their observations automatically, without requiring them to navigate a hierarchy of credentialed gatekeepers, was not a nice idea. It was a safety imperative. Claire read the paper on a flight to San Francisco 3 days before it was published. She read it twice, then put her phone down and looked out the plane window at the darkness below. She thought about Marcus Reeves telling Danny to come back in the morning. She thought about the White Plains facility manager logging a maintenance observation. She thought about 41 job rejections and a 6-year-old's bus schedule, and a tool built in the evenings because a problem was bothering someone who did not have the title to make anyone else bother with it. She thought about what it cost, across every industry, every year, to ignore the people who were closest to the problem. She picked up her phone and sent Danny a message. It said, "This is the best thing written about infrastructure risk in 10 years. When we land the Series D, I want to fund a standalone research division around this. You would lead it. Think about it." His reply came 4 minutes later. It said, "Maya wants to know if the research division will have good snacks." Claire smiled at her phone in the dark of the cabin, 30,000 feet above a country full of systems running quietly in the night, full of problems sitting unseen in server rooms and maintenance bays and cooling units, waiting for someone to come through the right door at the right moment and look at them properly. The Series D closed 11 days later at a valuation of $850 million. The research division, formerly named the Meridian Infrastructure Resilience Lab, opened its doors 6 months after that, on a Wednesday morning, with Danny Reyes as its founding director and a kitchen on the 3rd floor that was, by any reasonable measure, exceptionally well stocked. Maya visited on the opening day, carrying her toolkit in both arms. She inspected the lab's server environment with the focused attention of someone conducting a formal assessment, asked 2 questions that made Danny's senior engineer blink twice, and declared the snack situation acceptable with the authority of someone whose opinion on the matter was not in question. Claire watched them from the doorway of the lab, the quiet man and his serious daughter, and thought about a server room at midnight and a temperature display climbing past 73 degrees in 90 seconds that had changed, in ways she was still discovering, a very great deal more than just the direction of the numbers on the wall. Some things, it turned out, could not be designed in advance. Some things arrived in maintenance uniforms at midnight with a tool no one else had thought to build, and the only question that mattered was whether you were paying enough attention to recognize them. Claire Ashford had been paying attention. It was, she had decided, the most important thing she had ever gotten right.